This is from the 9/11 Commission, and it's Tim Roemer. He's interviewing U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft from the Bush administration about the lack or the complete dismissal of a military response to the USS Cole attack. Let's hear what they have to say.
General, thank you for your time here and your fulsome testimony. I want to turn to page 3 of your testimony, and where you're talking about being aggressive and doing something about Osama bin Laden. You certainly think Osama bin Laden is somewhere overseas, correct?
I don't know where he is.
I know where he is.
I don't believe he's in the United States
You don't
of
believe he's in
America.
the United States, and you want to go get him. And you go to the National Security Advisor of the President, and you say, let's find a way to get him.
I said that we should find and kill him. That should be the objective of our government.
So you're being aggressive. You're certainly trying to focus on the threat of bin Laden. Let me ask you a question about Al-Qaeda. With the USS Cole, we lose 17 sailors. The Clinton administration gets a preliminary judgment in December of 2000 that says, well, we can't quite associate this with command and control of Osama bin Laden, but these are definitely Al-Qaeda operatives. You, I believe, your administration gets a briefing in January. Same type of briefing. This is Al-Qaeda. Why don't you take this on the offensive like you do Osama bin Laden and say, we are going to go get Al-Qaeda. They can't do this to our military, to our sailors, to our people.
Well, Commissioner, I didn't get the briefing in January. As you may remember, I was one of the late individuals confirmed.
When do you understand this then? You're certainly in March meeting with Condi Rice to do something about this. Why don't you do something about Al-Qaeda?
Very frankly, we didn't get confirmation that as I explained earlier, that the command and control of Al-Qaeda might be involved in this matter until substantially later.
Now, I find this hard to believe, and I'm going to show you why. Because I'm going to play an excerpt from the 9/11 Commission, right? And in this one, it's Tim Roemer interviewing Sandy Berger. Sandy Berger was the National Security Advisor under the Clinton administration, the previous administration to the Bush administration. And Tim Roemer is going to ask him, what intelligence did you have regarding Al-Qaeda attacks against the USS Cole? And this is what Berger had to
Which
say.
is easier to do. And we see some of these preliminary judgments put forward by the CIA where they can't get command and control up to Osama bin Laden, but it was definitely operatives of Al-Qaeda. And we have a tough time understanding then why we can't go forward and retaliate against Al-Qaeda generally. Did you, in your frustration, and your concern about this, did you try to push the president on a more forward-leaning, aggressive approach to the guilt with respect to the USS Cole?
I think that I believed that the CIA and the FBI was doing everything possible. Now, we had some problems with the Yemenis during the Cole investigation, and they were restricting some access to some of our people. And the President of the United States called the President of Yemen, I believe on 2 occasions, but certainly on 1 occasion.
This is under a Yemeni investigation, an FBI and a CIA, and he's calling on the...
And the President's called the President of Yemen and said, you've got to cooperate with our people. We're not going to put up with this. And that problem was resolved. Obviously, there were an awful lot of Americans suddenly swarming into Yemen after that.
Now, there you have it, right? Okay, you have the National Security Advisor under Clinton stating that there was information intelligence linking Al Qaeda to the USS Cole attacks. Now I'm going to play another video. And in this one, it's basically, again, 9/11 Commission. And it's James Thompson actually interviewing the National Security Advisor under George Bush, and that's Condoleezza Rice. And what did she have to say regarding Al Qaeda in the USS Cole? Let's hear what she has to say.
The Cole. Why didn't the Bush administration respond to the Cole?
I think Secretary Rumsfeld has perhaps said it best. We really thought that the Cole incident was passed, that you didn't want to respond tit for tat. As I've said, there is strategic response and there's tactical response, and just responding to another attack in an insufficient way, we thought would actually probably embolden the terrorists. They'd been emboldened by everything else that had been done to them, and that the best course was to look ahead to a more aggressive strategy against them. I still believe to this day that the Al-Qaeda were prepared for a response to the Cole, and that as some of the intelligence suggested, bin Laden was intending to show that he'd yet survived another one, and that it might have been counterproductive.
So there you have it, right? There you have it. You have two officials from two different presidencies, right? You have the National Security Advisor under Clinton, Sandy Berger, and you have Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor under Bush, both suggesting that they had the intelligence linking Al Qaeda to the USS Cole bombing. Now, how is it possible that the Attorney General didn't have this information until months later? How is it possible? Now, I find that hard to believe because you have the Department of Justice investigating the attack, since it's a federal crime. It's a terrorist attack. And so they sent John O'Neill, the best they had in New York, the I-49 unit, investigating bin Laden and Al Qaeda in Yemen. And they came under fire by the U.S. Yemeni ambassador, Barbara Bodine, who eventually got John O'Neill out of the country and off the case. Ali Sufan took over, but I mean, they did run into problems. But here you have two dynamics. And I think what I'm about to explain to you will make sense as to why maybe Ashcroft didn't know. One is that the Clinton administration was briefed every week about matters, the daily threat matrix, matters in which what terrorist groups or countries are a threat to our national security. At the very top was Al Qaeda and bin Laden. And that's because Richard Clarke, the director of the National Security Council Counterterrorism, used to brief the president front and center. Threat by bin Laden and Al Qaeda. Here's the problem with the Clinton administration during this period. There were there was various assassination plots by the CIA for bin Laden, but nobody wanted to pull the trigger. Now, at this time, you got to remember the CIA was reformatting its agency under the direct pressure of the Church hearings. The new DCI, the Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet, wanted to improve the CIA's legacy in the eyes of the public. So that meant that here's a guy who's going to be, shaking hands with the biggest officials in Washington. Clean cut. CIA's got to lay low. So now the issue went to the Department of Defense. And Clinton used to give outrageous scenarios in which, the Green Berets could just drop in Afghanistan and rendition and bin Laden and kill him there. And Peter Shoemaker, who was one of the primary architects of the Able Danger program, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Land Information Warfare's Activity Division operation, where they collected metadata on Al Qaeda and threats inside the United States. So he overheard the president say that, he should drop in and just, rendition bin Laden to kill him. And Shoemaker says, to, the people on the table, hey, what is the president watching too many movies? He's surrounded by Taliban. It would take like 300 fighters to, fight off against these people, and, people are going to get killed for this. So the Department of Defense just, couldn't agree on anything. And plus, with the newest edition of the drone program, the drone strike program, nobody wanted to touch it because they didn't want to be seen as, some nefarious agency that just uses drones to kill people. Well, fast forward 30 years, and now look, everyone's using them. So, they just didn't pull the trigger. The Bush administration only hired one layover from the Clinton administration, Richard Clark. And the number one priority to the Bush administration was China and North Korea. Al-Qaeda was not a priority. And Richard Clark used to beg the Condoleezza Rice to have like a meeting with Bush about Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. No go. So the Bush administration basically ignored the problem. The Clinton administration basically couldn't pull the trigger. Now you have John Ashcroft, who says, I didn't see the information until much later, which is, I don't know, I can't say he's lying. It makes no sense for him to lie. Why would he lie about it? I think he was out of the loop, which is shocking. There were, different factions within the Bush administration. You had a group called the Vulcans, the god of war, the god of fire. And these were people like the Secretary of State Colin Powell, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, I think Rumsfeld. No, not Cheney, Rumsfeld. And then you had a more shadowy, nefarious group that had ties to Israeli government and the United States government. These were the neoconservatives. Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, Louis Libby. And these are the people that basically tried to tie Iraq to the 9/3 bomb because they saw Iraq as a threat. But it was really Israel, basically, that was pushing us. Now, when 9/11 happened, you can't just say that the Bush administration wanted this to happen, but they sure benefited from it. And now they had that tie because the CIA, the Bush, the neocons told Bush to find a link between Iraq and 9/11. And so the job went to the director of the FBI, Robert Mueller. And Mueller said, there is no, I can't find any evidence. So now it went to the DCI, George Tenet. George Tenet basically found out that the Egyptians had arrested an individual named Sheikh Ibn al-Libi. Al-Libi was a trainer in Afghanistan training camp, and they tortured him because the CIA torture program was not up and running yet. So the Egyptians tortured him, and they tortured him so badly that he told them whatever they wanted to hear, which was that Ba'athist officials under the Saddam Hussein regime were procuring chemical and biological weapons with Al-Qaeda. That information, which wasn't vetted, went to the DCI, George Tenet, which was then given to the Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who then went before the National Security Council, and he got approval for war on information that was false. And 1.5 million people approximately were killed in this war based on a lie. So, there's multiple variables here. But the one thing is, I wanted to make clear, how in the heck can Ashcroft sit there and say, I didn't have the information until much later? The information was known to the Clinton officials. It was known to Condoleezza Rice. It was not known to him. Either he's in on it or he's out of the loop.
You remember when?
It pauses a little.
I believe it was either late in the summer or the fall of 2001 when the final determination was made. And that was a time after which I believe we brought criminal charges although obviously those are not resolved.
Law enforcement.
It was an indictment on bin Laden after the 1998 East Africa bombings. And this information came from an informant. Now, a lot of people tend to forget this. Al Qaeda, the first Al Qaeda informant, Jamal Al Fadl, he went to the FBI and told them about the hierarchy and how Al Qaeda is structured. And the FBI had, a lot of this information was not known to the Department of Justice. So the CIA got involved. They were sharing information about Al Qaeda structure. My goodness, they're a bigger organization. And so he gave the FBI, everything. He was an important informant. And that's when the first indictment came on bin Laden. Now, also, a lot of people tend to forget this. There was an active warrant for bin Laden's arrest in 1998. And it came from not from the United States, not from Israel, not even from Saudi Arabia. It came from Libya. Muammar Gaddafi, that's right, the man the U.S. helped to get killed, which, his country is now overrun by these jihadist gangs, Al Qaeda affiliates in the Islamic State. God knows who else, Boko Haram, right? As-Sahab, who knows these groups. And it was Muammar Gaddafi because I think it was the Kobar Towers or the East Africa bombings where, a couple of Libyans were killed. And Muammar Gaddafi put an arrest warrant out for it. That's something else.
Different. And it is a totally different world, and the executive responsibilities in regard to presidential orders and directives are different than.
But why not go after Al Qaeda? Why not militarily go after Al Qaeda rather than a law enforcement type of activity?
Well, first of all, let us make it clear that it's not either or. That mere fact that we would go after Al Qaeda doesn't mean that we wouldn't also pursue and have the option of criminal remedies as well. The Justice Department has done that and continued to do that, even against individuals who might be involved in Al Qaeda or in more warlike settings.
Now, let me expand on this because this is interesting that Ashcroft brings us up about a judicial matter regarding Al Qaeda and bin Laden. I've always said that I could never understand why the special forces assassinated bin Laden. You had much more nefarious characters that were much more operational. And people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind of the 19 World Trade Center bombing. Ramzi bin al-Shib, right? Abu Zubaydah, which later became known as the first prisoner who had no links to Al Qaeda. Nevertheless, these were all people that were, that can move around. Bin Laden was older. He was in his 60s, I think 62, 63. And he walked with a limp. Are you telling me that the biggest name in all of 9/11, that the victims' families wouldn't love to see the special forces detain bin Laden, bring him back to the United States, and hand him over to Guantanamo or to the Southern District of New York? And if there's any one person that deserves Guantanamo, it's bin Laden. Why didn't they do this? It would have been front page headline for everybody involved. Instead, they kill him and dump his body in the ocean so that, his grave wouldn't be a marker for jihadists. I can understand that, but you can see how, very fringe conspiracies can arise out of this. Oh, bin Laden's alive. He's somewhere in South America with Hitler. He never existed. Bin Laden's a double somewhere. All this, right? Leading you from jumping to one belief to another, but you're not knowing anything. Maybe that's the reason why the CIA does this, to hide information so you can believe whatever you want, but nothing of significance. So I was always a critic of that operation. I think it was Operation Neptune Spear. That was the name of the operation for killing bin Laden. But and I think it was done by the Gold Team of DevGru, which is Special Forces. or red team. It's either red or gold. It's one of those. But yeah, I would have loved to see Bin Laden face justice in the Southern District of New York. Wouldn't you?
If you're asking me why the administration didn't make a judgment, I believe that the administration, while it understood that there were ties to al-Qaeda by those who were involved in the Cole bombing, that the kind of information that would support a different judgment was not existent until substantially later.
But again, you're asking for a final conclusion rather than a preliminary judgment that says al-Qaeda is responsible. Al-Qaeda did this. Al-Qaeda killed our sailors.
The information
Why
was there.
have to wait 6, 8
Right.
months down the line to say this is a particular individual, Osama bin Laden?
I don't understand your question, sir.
This
This is
believe
not
that
just a
before we-
terrorism fight against.
I don't get it. This is surprising to me. Like, I don't get it. Why? How is it that, Roemer's, aghast at this. He's like, why did you guys have to wait for a response? The information was out there. The intelligence was out there. There was enough information linking al-Qaeda to the USS Cole bombing. Why didn't you guys pull the trigger? Now, is Ashcroft basically trying to save the Bush administration some face here by saying, hey, listen, they just didn't have the information because it wasn't al-Qaeda wasn't a priority, even though all throughout the spring of 2001, you had countries from all over the world giving the United States government intelligence regarding bin Laden's wish to strike inside the United States using airlines as weapons. I mean, look at the August 6th PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief. Bin Laden to strike inside the United States. The information came from intelligence from sources of years ago regarding the Pachinko plot, and also Ahmed Rassam, one of the operators of the Millennium bombing plot. He was going to bomb LAX airport. And they talked about the threat to the airline industry. So it wasn't a secret. So I don't get this posturing by Ashcroft.
Against Osama bin Laden. It's al-Qaeda. It's jihadists. It's the conveyor belts producing people that want to kill us in Afghanistan. So my question is, why not go after broadly that group of people rather than one single individual?
Well, I believe that's eventually what we did, but obviously it's not a decision we made, and we didn't have the kind of information or predicate upon which to make that decision earlier. Whether or not we should have absent that predicate is a policy judgment that I certainly wasn't mine to make.
Thank you, sir.
Right. And you know what? I mean, but I either look, I'm perplexed at this. It's either he's out of the loop and the information was not passed to him, which is, shocking because the FBI investigated the matter and he's the attorney general, or he's lying about it, which doesn't make sense. Why would he lie about not seeing information that could have, brought about a war with al-Qaeda in Yemen? I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know. Maybe you guys have some thoughts regarding it. Please type it in the comments below. But it's surprising to me because the information was there. That's why I played those videos. All right, listen, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into the video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night, everybody.